control the growth of the for-profit and speculative financial sector to unleash the productive forces.
剑桥发展经济学者约斯坦·豪格认为，西方总把中国压进自由或威权的二选一。他不是否认权力争议，而是追问，除了选举，还该怎样判断一个政府能不能把发展做出来？
In terms of sort of when people look at China, something I'm very interested in is people often say, "Oh yeah, the growth, great. The increased living standards, great. I like that they have, high-speed rail. I like that they have lots of housing. They're lifting people out of poverty, fantastic. But I don't like that it's not a liberal democracy. I don't like that they don't have independent trade unions." And you're sort of looking at it like a sort of pick and mix, where people think, well, let's take all of the good bits without any of the bad bits. And I suppose I feel like my position is more, you've probably got to take it as a whole. One of the reasons they got 10% growth is because they kept labor costs down. You couldn't have had 10% growth with independent trade unions. You probably couldn't have had 10% growth with liberal democracy. So do you have to take the rough with the smooth when it comes to China?
I'm not entirely sure if it's the case. Historically, you do see that, yes, in the past sort of 100 years or so, countries that have caught up fast have had a period of labor repression. I don't think we should, then sort of conclude that, okay, you need to repress labor to develop for a period. I think that's a dark conclusion, a path that I don't
if you go back to if you go back to China in 1980s, you're in a Politburo meeting where Deng is saying the thing we need to do is get growth as fast as possible because that is the way we're going to lift, the hundreds of millions of our citizens out of poverty. We can't be ideological about this. What we have to do is look at how we get to this objective, which is a valuable objective. It's one that is going to lift people who are horrifically poor into middle-class lifestyles. He's saying, I think to do that, we can't go down this Western liberal route of having independent trade unions, because that will mean that our exports won't be competitive, and that will mean that we won't be able to achieve growth. And to some degree, he probably feared that would create an independent power base that might create chaos. You're in a room with Deng in the 1980s. Do you say, no, Deng, I think you can have 10% growth and be more relaxed about independent trade unionism?
There, I think you said something very important and something that's very in line with how I believe that the Chinese government thinks that first and foremost, we need to achieve economic development. We need to grow the pie. We need to sort of unleash the productive forces and become this big, powerful nation in the world economy. We need to go on a path of sovereign development. This is something Mao, emphasized a lot too. That, we've been humiliated for such a long time. We need to grow. And this idea of economic development first and the state getting legitimacy from economic development is a really powerful thing in Chinese politics.
I suppose the reason I was focusing more on labor repression rather than liberal democracy is because I think you can, obviously we've got a very left-wing audience. And I think you can actually make an argument to sort of your bog standard leftist that liberal democracy isn't the only legitimate form of government. And I think if they say sort of the Chinese Communist Party with their one-party state, you might call it whole system democracy, you might call it sort of authoritarianism, maybe you call it a little bit of both. If you say that's a legitimate system given how much sort of growth it brought about, I think many people on the left are willing to accept that. If you say to people on the left, actually, China were probably right to ban independent trade unionism, that's much more controversial. And I like to focus on the real tensions. Obviously, if you've got a liberal audience, they're going to be more concerned about the liberal democratic point.
I'm in line with you here. I do think there is more tension here when it comes to the labor standards aspect and the power of labor. And that is, I think, if there's one area of China's economy that sort of doesn't neatly fit in to what the left prescribes to, it is the power of workers and the power of labor. And as we discussed, it's complex. On the liberal democracy bit, I do think when you study China, it's important to try and take off the Western liberal democracy goggles and really try to understand the governance structure and ask questions like, are the people happy with their government? Is the state legitimate? Are the people in power competent, and do they try to serve their people? These are also important questions when we understand democracy. Some people say, oh, China is a democracy. I wouldn't go that far. I think China is still authoritarian. It limits certain freedoms, but the perception of democracy in China, the perception of a government that delivers on well-being, is actually quite high. A recent report by this organization called the Alliance of Democracies Foundation that was done together with NERA Data, a Danish-based NGO, I believe, that's chaired by Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO head, so not a pro-China organization. They found that perceptions of democracy in China is higher than in the UK, France, and the US. And there are plenty of countries around the world in that report where perceptions of democracy were very low. So it's not like, they brainwash the people into believing that they have democracy in all authoritarian regimes. There's something real to be said about, a governance structure in China where, yes, it's a one-party state. It doesn't have national elections, but they have a system of meritocracy of getting competent people into power that actually deliver on economic development and people's needs. And I encourage your audience here to go and Google, how do you become a top politician in China? And you'll find that it's really fucking hard to become a top politician in China. Much harder it is than in the US, where if you have a lot of money and you're good in front of a camera, then you can have a real shot at becoming head of state. That's not the case in China.
Yeah, I mean, something that really blew my mind sort of about the nature of the Communist Party, because when you think of one-party rule, you sort of tend to think of sort of a small gang of thugs, basically, who are enforcing their rule over people. Whereas the Communist Party of China is more like a very advanced civil service / sort of social economic network. And it is the case, as far as I understand, that sort of if you're top in your class, the top person in each class in high school will get invited to join the party. Because it's really, it's not like joining the Labour Party where you just sign your direct debit and now you're a member of the party. They want sort of the best and the brightest in the Chinese Communist Party because it is a very meritocratic organization and you will rise to the top. I mean, presumably it matters who you know. I mean, Xi Jinping's dad was a revolutionary who was also very high up
it matters.
in the Chinese government. But they are also highly qualified people who have got there via sort of being highly intelligent and working very hard.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is an elite in China. There's probably some nepotism as well. Having connections matters, etc. There have also been, instances of corruption, and we heard about how sort of Xi is trying to crack down on corruption now. But yeah, to get to the very top, so the Chinese, the Communist Party of China, they have about 100 million members, and obviously just a very, very few of them make it to the very top. And normally you have to serve in your province, in your region, as a top official.
Kind of like Andy Burnham.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Before you can become leader, you've got to go and govern a province for 10 years.
There you go. I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into that.
Yeah.
I'll hand that area to you, Michael. But yeah, kind of like that. And you have to do a good job for many years.
Just like Andy Burnham.
Just like Andy Burnham.
I'm very Andy Burnham. I'm China pilled and Andy Burnham pilled at the moment. They're my two
good.
horses.
And yeah, you have to have a track record of performing in your province for a long time before you actually make it to.
Just like Andy. Sorry, I'm going to stop that. I'll let you continue.
No. That's. I mean, that was what I had to say about it.
Because I am very relaxed about the non-liberal features of China. And the reason I am quite relaxed about that is because I feel like the biggest inhibition to freedom is really poverty. Like, if you have gone from someone who was working in a rice paddy field, not entirely sure you're going to have enough food in sort of 2-3 years full time. Obviously, the worst famines in China were sort of thanks to Mao. But even despite that, people living in agricultural communities, it's not like the highest quality of life. If you, over a 30-year period, instead of working in agriculture as basically a peasant farmer, your opportunities have increased to the extent that you might go to university. Like, I think that's a more important freedom than the ability to set up your own YouTube show, for example, and say whatever you want about the leader. Right? If I could choose between being a peasant with a YouTube show or someone in a country without freedom of speech going to university, I would choose the latter. So I'm relaxed about their non-liberal features because I think the proof is in the pudding, which they have overall increased the freedom of the Chinese people over the past 40 years by lifting so many of them out of poverty. However, given that position, it does make it more complex to then be incredibly outraged, for example, when the British government try and prescribe an organization like Palestine Action that have smashed up some machines in a weapons manufacturer. So if that happened in China, it's going to be worse than prescription, right? If you are in China and you break into a weapons manufacturer that the Chinese see as key to its foreign policy interests and smash up stuff, you're not going to prison for a couple of years. You're going to prison for a very long time. This organization, if our government were to shut down Novara Media, we would be outraged. I hope our audience would be outraged. This would not exist in China. So I suppose I struggle with my relaxedness about the Chinese system because I think the means or the ends justifies the means to some degree. But then if you are so flexible in sort of what you will accept as an intermediary step to sort of overall increasing living standards, I mean, where do you stand on this?
I really like what you're saying about economic freedoms being maybe the most important ones. And I think on the right, that is often lost, this idea that, as long as we have individual freedoms, and we've seen how there are certain types of freedoms that create extremely unequal societies. So, people on the right will often point out that the United States is a very free society. Well, you have freedom of certain people to exploit other people. I think Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist, he recently wrote a book kind of critiquing Friedrich Hayek's idea of freedom here. And he basically pointed this out, that in a lot of the wealthy Western society, and especially, he pointed out in the United States, you don't actually have this basic economic freedom. When you don't have, freedom to not be exploited by two jobs, or when you don't have freedom to choose the education you want, or freedom to get basic health services, what kind of freedom do you have? In an ideal society, you'd have this, and also these individual freedoms we are talking about that maybe you don't have in China. And when it comes to, say, free press, and I think we're both fans of the idea of having a free press and an independent media. I mean, you're part of an independent media organization. There's huge debate about that in China. I think, is there a trade-off? Could China have achieved what they have achieved without this sort of strong state that regulates everything? Maybe not. But I think it's probably time. My view is that it's time for them to try and relax its censorship a bit more. And there are actually there's really interesting debate in China right now. A lot of people in sort of high-level positions who are complaining about the censorship policies, who feel like there should be more free press, there should be more freedom of expression. In any society where you want some sort of critical debate about where society is heading, you want more of that. I think that's a very sort of legitimate criticism to launch at China. It seemed like you were kind of saying that, well, they see this as an intermediate step. And yes, there are some people who say, like, this is just, something they're doing on the path to, I don't know, communist paradise, something like that. You could make a case that there is sort of this transition period towards more socialism, then eventually communism. I'm not convinced by that, but certainly, there's this argument in development economics that when you increase the material standards of living for people, then you also get this middle class that advocates for more individual freedom as well. So this will, I think, happen more and more in a society like China, that people will become, the public will voice their opinion more loudly about having more of these individual freedoms.
Isn't that opinion, well, I mean, it is an opinion that was often expressed 20 years ago. So sort of like the whole idea of bringing China into the WTO, so the World Trade Organization, is this idea that as they might have a different system to us now, but as they get rich, as their incomes rise, as their middle class gets bigger, they will demand the same kind of liberal rights. That means that China's political system will converge with the West. And sort of lots of people were making that argument 20 years ago. China is a lot richer now than it was then. And actually, if anything, it's gone in the other direction. So many people now look back at the noughties and the 2010s as a period which was relatively liberal in terms of what you could say, and independent media. It was, it's never completely independent, but semi-independent media. Xi Jinping has taken China in, I think most people would agree, a more authoritarian direction. Some people would say, yeah, he had to do that because he has, in the process, clamped down on corruption and stabilized the system, and sort of he was worried it was losing its purpose and that it was beginning to ossify. No one believed in communism, and it was like the Soviet Union in the 1980s, and it was ready to collapse. So many people would say he's reinvigorated the system. He seems a bit more interested in redistribution, but he's clearly less liberal. And so your argument you've just made there, is it a little bit out of date?
I think there are nuances to the direction that she's taking Chinese society. To what extent was China really that liberal in the sense of, allowing as many individual freedoms as today? Yes, she is less liberal than Deng. He's also more, I think, pro-poverty.
Pro-poverty alleviation.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
He might not be liberal, but at least he's pro-poverty.
Thank you for correcting me there. It would have been a huge more pro-poverty alleviation, more sort of anti. I think there's a huge segment of a larger segment of the elite and the liberal elite in China that dislike him, because he is a lot about improving the conditions for people in rural areas. He's not very liked among the wealthy. So maybe we hear these wealthy elite voices more. Inequality has not risen under Xi. Some would say it's gone down slightly. If you look at the Gini index in China, it's more or less been stable or reduced slightly for the past, I believe, decade or so.
Yeah.
So I think
presumably inequality in China, it looks a little bit like in the UK in a way, sort of it rises dramatically in the 80s.
Yeah.
And does it continue rising in the 90s and then levels off?
Yeah, it's leveled in the past 10 years. Inequality in China is a problem. I think that's something that she's trying to do something about. But yeah, he is certainly sort of fits into this idea of an authoritarian leader, but I would say that he is more a authoritarian developmental leader than authoritarian predatory.
Yeah. Do you think the China model is exportable? Sort of, if you were a politician in a developing nation, let's say you're Ethiopian or Pakistan, or I mean Pakistan's middle income, but I think they want to achieve growth levels like China, for example. Should they try and copy the Chinese model, or is the Chinese model something that only the Chinese can do because of sort of unique characteristics of their civilization and their nation and their history?
All development experiences are ultimately unique and historically contingent. China is also massive, so you can't copy the scale of China unless, of course, you're India. So it holds clear lessons for India, more so maybe than other development countries. But there are certain things like, exactly how the state controlled the liberalization process. Things like how do you use state-owned enterprises in your interaction with foreign investors? How do you control the financial sector, the importance of development banks, the importance of not just uncontrolled liberalization, which we saw went really badly in sub-Saharan African countries in the 1980s and 1990s. So there are definitely aspects of Chinese development policy that I think you can take lessons for other developing countries. I even think China holds lessons for countries like the UK and the US, especially with respect to how much power the for-profit financial sector has in these countries. You know, the UK, it is, I can't think of another high-income country where you basically only have people working in private sector finance and law in London who are really high paid. We don't pay engineers really well in this country, and we ask ourselves, why has the industrial base eroded? There are obviously many reasons for that. But you can actually take clear lessons for China in terms of how it tried to.
豪格提出的干部选拔、公众认同和金融控制，都是一位发展经济学者的解释，不是凭一场访谈就能盖章的事实。原篇对劳动权利、审查和个人自由的质疑也不该被剪掉。但是这场对话提醒我们，选举和权利很重要，却也不能替代对治理结果的追问。只看自由或威权两个标签，仍然解释不了中国为什么能在多年里把资源从短期投机拉回产业、建设和公共能力。理解中国不是停止讨论权利，而是同时追问它有没有能力把承诺变成持续可见的结果。当一个国家能把金融、产业和长期目标接在一起，外部世界面对的就不只是一个制度名称，而是一种实际的组织能力。